Hello and welcome, esteemed guests, to my channel. My name is Ainsley. Let's do stuff. Today we're back with another speed build. I had a lot of fun doing this one. I wasn't sure originally who was going to be the sim I had in mind for this house. Of course you can put whatever sim you'd like, but I usually like to have an idea of what kind of sim is going to live in the house, and this one I didn't have so much of an idea. I just knew that I wanted to use those pink, almost magenta purple countertops that come with base game. There's two different kinds. There's a cheaper one and a more expensive one that both come in that color, and I knew I wanted to use that color swatch in the kitchen because I almost never use it, so I wanted to see if I could make use of it. All told, I probably should have gone in with a more clear idea of who would live in the house. I don't know if any of you have the same problem I do, but I find it so hard to build a house if I don't know who's living in it. It's hard to personalize or to put a touch on it if you don't have the story to go with it. And maybe that's because I like approaching the game from a storyteller's point of view and less a designer or architect's point of view. I know there are probably people who would rather go in and just build the house and not think much about the residents, which is really cool, but I don't know. It seems every time I try to do that, I end up hemming and hawing on swatches and furniture for far too long. Also, I for some reason had it in my head that the counters were much more pink than they actually were. I probably should have put them down first, because what I end up with is a house that's more purple than pink, because I took a look at the countertops and went, really, this isn't like baby bubblegum pink the way I've been laying out the living room. Actually, it's really frustrating because some color swatches match it perfectly and others are like not quite the right tone, and I wish there was like more consistency across the swatches and more things matched. Then again, I really like a matchy build and I know some people don't, so maybe for others it's the exact right amount of matching versus having unique swatches. Once I place the door, we're gonna go ahead and lay down the counters. Yeah, I thought about using these cheap ones first, but I don't know, then I kind of realized that nothing else in the house was going to be cheap, so I figured given that they're the same colorway, I may as well use the more expensive ones, and I like the way they look a bit better with the handles on the outside. What are those called? Appliances, or I can't think of the right word for it, but you know what I mean. The hardware. That's what it is, the hardware. I also lucked into the perfect layout to have an island counter, which is really nice. I like island counters, but I find sometimes they're hard to fit into a build. They don't work exactly right. But here, where it's a tiny build, I figured I wasn't going to have a proper dining table, though I do put one outside. There's none inside the build, so a island is the perfect solution to that. I also went with some chairs over a long sofa in the living room because I didn't want to have a harsh line between the kitchen space and the living space with the back of a couch. Now, the final layout for the living space is definitely funky. It might not be to everybody's taste. Even I'm not 100% sure if I like the way it flows, but it definitely has the realistic feeling of being a bit cramped, because to me, even though it's a smaller space, I think these are people who would need a lot of items in the living space. I finally decided on a storyline that this house would be a jazz musician or blues musician's house, so I needed to fit in a keyboard and a microphone, so I wiggle things around in the living space in a way that does read as a little bit haphazard and maybe not the best laid out, but I don't actually mind it so much. I think it might add to the look. And here I am doing my new favorite thing, which is instead of putting a solid wall across a living space to divide it from the bedroom or to divide it from another room, I am just putting up some columns and some spandrels, and I'm going to put some curtains across. Now, this doesn't work out as well in this build as it does in the Tiny Geologist build that I did, where there's room for perfectly sized curtains that fit really well. In this case, what I actually do is use the wall decoration of the beads that comes with City Living, and I put them on the inside, and I just imagine that they go all the way across, or that they are the right length to go across. I find with curtains in this game, you have to stretch your imagination a little bit because none of them are perfect, but I did find it looks enough like it's attached or like anchored to the spandrel, so to me it works. Like always, if you rather a solid door, there is room to put one if you wanted to put a wall up and a door, but I kind of like the way it opens the living space and it makes it look bigger. You can download this house from the gallery. My ID is Ainsley Plays Sims, and it's listed as a jazz musician's house or jazz musician's tiny home, something like that. You can also search it by using the hashtag Ainsley Plays Sims or AinsleeDoesStuff. It's tagged as both. And if you found my channel from my build in the gallery, thank you and welcome. You can see here we're picking out a feature wall to go on that fireplace wall. I love the way the gradient works in this build between the black and the purple, because I didn't want it to be so overwhelmingly magenta purple pink that I thought a good counterpoint would be black. It almost makes it look classy in a way, even though nothing about that color particularly screams classy. And I also put down the Heroes flooring from Get Famous, which I think is one of my favorite big tile swatches. I'm trying desperately not to overuse it in my builds because it definitely sings to me. I love how clean it looks. I used it in contrast with the black tile from, I believe it's Get Together. Here I'm working on the corner patio piece. I wanted to put in a spot for a barbecue because I haven't really used one in any of my previous builds, and I don't love making use of outdoor spaces a lot myself. I don't like the bugs and I don't like the heat, so for me, outdoor spaces, I forget about them a lot when I'm doing my own builds because they're not something that I gravitate towards. But this house really felt like it suited it. I love that coffee table with the fire, and I thought it matched the modern fireplace really well that I put in the living space. So I gave them room to sit out on the deck and grill some burgers, and I also put a little spot in the backyard that's covered where they can sit and eat with a big group if they wanted to entertain, or they could also, there's a bar back there so they could serve drinks. I briefly entertained putting in the bubble blower, because I thought that might suit the kind of Sims who would live in a house that's very purple and almost like old world rock star, if that makes sense. Like, it sort of suits the image I have in my head of somebody who's maybe from like the 70s. I keep picturing a very hairy man in a Speedo on a bearskin rug when I look at this place. It's something about it gives me that vibe. So I thought about putting the hookah pipe, but again, bubble blower, but I think that I'm going to save it for a later build. Like, it's really cool, but I don't know that it 100% fit here, so I would like to use it, just not in this build. Here I'm adding one of my favorite features to the exterior of the house, which are these slanted sort of industrial roofs that I make into little sunroofs. I really like the way that that looks. They're so cool, and when it's put next to just the sort of flat roof texture, I really like how that looks. I also played around with the height of the half walls to give some different dimension to the way that the profile of the house looks from the outside. I played around with bringing the purpley pink color to the outside of the house, but none of the swatches were the right color to match what was happening on the inside, which again was my gripe about not having enough matching swatches. So instead I do something that's kind of really industrial between, I think that texture, it looks very wooden, but I think that texture is technically in stonework, the grayish tone that I used, and then a bit of stucco and the brick, so I like how it looks. I'm trying to kind of moderate between doing a lot of this sort of industrial modern stuff that I like and doing some more traditional stuff, because I know not everyone wants to see all of the same things, but I don't know, I find it so much easier to build when I'm building in a style that I like, so you'll probably see a lot of this style on the channel. Also, you might notice I posted at a different time than I usually do. I've been doing Wednesdays and Saturdays, but with my work schedule, I would almost rather switch to Thursdays and Sundays, so that's kind of what I'm thinking of doing, because it works better for me to have a day completely off the day before a video goes out so that I have time to work on it rather than posting it on the first day off that I have. I find sometimes I'm scrambling a bit to try to get everything together. Here I'm working on that little outdoor space that I talked about. I put a bit of a curved roof, but it does have the metal texture that the other roof to the house has. and I sunk it down a little bit because I thought that would be really cool to have it at a different height level than the rest of the house. And I hung those little lights from, I think it's Parenthood, across to make it feel kind of cozy and welcoming. I see this as their primary entertaining space, whether it's a single sim or maybe even a couple. Like, I almost see an older couple here. Somebody who would be a real world equivalent, maybe in their late 60s, early 70s, and maybe she was a lounge singer and he was a saxophonist, and they have just always shared their love of music together, and maybe they toured and they never really had kids, so they wanted this kind of simple one level place to be able to settle into in their retirement, that they can still have all their old cats from the business around to have a drink and have, some burgers and tickle the ivories a bit, but that is comfortable for them. I don't know. I really like giving the Sims that I'm thinking about in a house some personality, even if I'm never going to play with them or ever going to make them. To me, that's what really brings the build together. Like, I was kind of struggling with this place until I put down those 3 paintings above the bed of the jazz musicians, and then I was like, oh yeah, okay, so I definitely know now who this house is for, and thereby how I should decorate it and how I should lay it out. So here I'm just cluttering up the kitchen space a bit. They can still use all the island counters minus that one in the corner to cook, which they wouldn't be able to use anyway because it's behind the fridge. And actually, I don't include it in the recording because I only remembered when I went to take screenshots, but there wasn't a computer in this place, and I just really like having a computer, so I put one on the island by the fruit bowl and the bread box. And then you also saw me use that really low-lying fence that we got with Get to Work to differentiate between the bedroom and the kitchen, because you know how in houses, I don't know what it's called, but you'll have either it's a piece of metal or wood that breaks up the change in flooring when you go from one floor type to another. So I will like including that in my builds because I find it looks really realistic. And here I am fighting with curtains. Again, you'll have to pretend that these extend all the way down. And I tried this jazz sign, but I had to size it down so much it didn't really work. So I went with this one instead, and I really like, again, the way that it kind of was maybe the old sign outside the bar or the lounge where they all used to play and sing when they were young, and here I am fitting in the keyboard. It does mean you can't access the bookshelf, but what I did, and I didn't record it, but I went in and I included one of those little wall shelves behind the bookcase, so your sim can use that bookshelf to get to books, and it mostly fits pretty seamlessly. Here I added, I love those little tiny, they're not quite end tables, but I like to use them that way. They're in miscellaneous surfaces. If you're looking for them in the menu, they came with Get to Work. I think it's a doctor's trolley, and I put a little notepad on it because I like to imagine that any creative sim would have a little notepad by their bed to be able to jot things down. Or maybe, it's a day planner where they're trying to remember, okay, take your medication, or that kind of thing. I just like having little notepads around because I find that very human. Here I'm just putting in bits of landscaping. I didn't want to go crazy with it because I didn't want to create something that would theoretically require a lot of maintenance. I know your Sims don't actually have to maintain it, but in the real world they would. And then I added these little fountain details, which I find just so cool. I don't use fountains much, but I thought it added to that opulent, over-the-top 70s look. But yeah, that's everything for the build. We're moving into the screenshots, so thank you so much for watching. Leave any comments, questions, or suggestions you have down below. I absolutely love getting feedback from you. And that's it. The music in this video was done by Chucky, as it usually is. He's fantastic. If you check him out on SoundCloud, that'd be awesome. I'll leave his link in the description bar below. And until next time, get out there and do stuff.